Welcome back. So now we're going to add some wheels to our car so it can roll around. So let's make sure you're still in your flexible design and we'll do Shift A. Make sure your 3D cursor is in the center. If it's not, do Shift S and say cursor to world origin. And then we want to add, so Shift A, mesh, and we're going to use a cylinder. And the cylinder's in there is just really, really tiny. So let's go ahead and bring it up. Maybe a radius of 7. And you can kind of see it right there. And our depth, we want the exact same width of our car. So let's do 30. There we go. And let's double our count here. So instead of 32, let's do 64. That way we have nice, smooth wheels. So you can see that kind of made a little bit more round because we do want this car to roll. And it's sticking straight up, but let's rotate it on the y-axis. 90 degrees. So we'll just do 90. And there we go. So that's looking just like we want it. I'm going to go into material view. And when you're in material or solid mode, you should get this like weird artifacting going on. And it looks like an error, but it's actually good for us because that tells me as a designer and you that these are exactly on top of each other. And that's what we want. Because whenever we 3D print this car, we're going to actually turn it on its side. And so we want the wheel and the side of the car to be exactly the same, height. It's all even. So that's really good. So let's go to side view with 3 and we're going to hit G. So make sure you're in right orthographic. And we're going to bring the wheel down to the front here. And you can see that center origin point right there in the middle. You don't want that too low. You want it a little above the base because we're going to run an axle through the car. So maybe even a little higher. So G, and just kind of put that somewhere in there. And don't worry, we can always adjust it, but kind of, slide it somewhere around in that area. And now let's go ahead and name our cylinder. We'll just call this wheels. And now we're going to add a mirror modifier. That way we only have to worry about one side here and Blender will just do the rest of the work for us. So make sure you still have your wheels selected and we're going to do add modifier and we're going to do a mirror modifier. And instead of the X, we're going to check the Y. And Blender doesn't know what it wants us to mirror on or, mirror from. So we're going to tell the mirror object to be the car. And there we go. Now you should have two kind of like Fred Flintstone looking wheels. And that's really good. So we're getting somewhere. And now what we're going to do is turn these kind of weird looking wheels. We're going to add an axle. So go ahead and tab into edit mode. And we're going to add 4 loop cuts on this. So do Control R and then just hit 4 on your keyboard up at the top and click. And if you accidentally move, just hit 0 and then lock it in with a click, or you can hit enter. And now we've got all these little, loop cuts on our wheels here. And we're going to go to face selection or just hit 3 on your keyboard there and come into here and click on one of these edges. You can alt click, or what I do is just double click, depending on how your preferences are set up. But you want to be able to, it's essentially like a loop select. So alt double click or alt click should let you do a loop select. And then we're going to hit S on our keyboard and scale it on down. And just keep on scaling it pretty far. Let's actually go into X-ray mode and kind of see what we're working with here. And you don't want it like way too thin. You want to be a little thick because that's going to be 3D printed and you don't want it to break on you if it's too tiny. So, give it a little bit of space there. So let's go ahead and go into our bottom view and just hold Control and then hit 7 on your numpad. And that will take you to the bottom orthographic. And now what we're going to do is just scale this little selection axle piece right here with S and X and just kind of stretch it out a little bit. And we don't want to go too far because we're going to need a 45-degree angle. So just kind of eyeball a 45-degree angle somewhere like that. That looks pretty good. And now we've got our wheels. And if you zoom out, notice since we had the mirror modifier, Blender's already done all the work for us down on this side, and that is just great. So I'm going to turn off our X-ray view, and now our wheels are kind of tucked in there, and that's exactly what we want. But now what we need to do is make some tolerances, kind of some space in between the car and our wheels so that they can roll freely. Right now they're kind of just right on top of each other, and that is going to be no good. So I found this really cool trick inside of Blender to do offsets or tolerances. And if you're not familiar with tolerances, that's just the little tiny gaps in between two separate parts that will essentially let these wheels roll on their own. And it's very, very, very important skill to know tolerances in 3D print design. So I'm going to show you some tips and tricks that I use all the time so that you know for sure that you've got the right amount of clearance for your tolerances. So next thing you want to do, let's go back to object mode, and we're going to make sure you still have your wheels selected, and we're going to do Shift D and make a duplicate of your wheels here and just hit escape. So now the duplicate is right on top of the first set of wheels. And let's go ahead and rename those. We're just going to double click and change the one that says wheels.001. We're going to change that to wheels.well. So essentially this will be our wheel wells. And the good thing is that the modifier is still applied, so that's great. Now we're just going to add a new modifier that we haven't done too much with, but it's solidify. And I love this one. So what we're going to do is change the offset from -1 to 1 right there. And you can kind of see it went a little larger. It's kind of extruding a little bit there. Let me go into bottom view. So hold Control, hit 7. That's going to take us into bottom view, and just look at one of the wheel wells here, and let's turn on X-ray so you can kind of see what's happening. So right now, really not much is happening. You can kind of see if you slide the offset, there's some slight shifting happening, but just make sure you still have it on 1. And then this is where the magic comes in. We're going to take the thickness. Let me scroll over here, widen this out a little bit. We'll take the thickness and just increase that. So notice now this is really cool. It's essentially like making an offset. We could scale it, but it gets all really like weird and wonky. And it's not exactly perfect. So this is the way to make really nice offsets or tolerances for anything you're designing. So what I would like to do is just do like 0.3. That should be plenty enough clearance. You could even do 0.4 just to be safe. And notice that we've got enough little gap right here. We've got a nice gap right in the center part. And we've got the wheel wells sticking out just a little bit. And that's great because when we go to Boolean, that's going to subtract and make a nice clean hole for us. So let's turn off our see-through mode, and we'll go back down here, turn that off. And what we're going to do now is take our wheel well and then take your wheel well and then shift click on the car and do a brush Boolean difference. So Control minus on the numpad, and notice it looks terrible. It's like all this nasty geometry happening, but that's okay. And the reason that's happening is that we need to add a few more things to our solidify. So just make sure you have even thickness turned on, high quality normals, the fill rim checked, and only rim. And now you should have perfect tolerances and offsets. So really just these bottom 4, make sure those bad boys are turned on. And there we go. Now we've got some wheel wells, super easy, that are cut out, and that's going to let our wheels roll really nicely once we 3D print them. And so everything's looking pretty good, but what we need to do is parent all these together, because if we, drag the wheels and, kind of move them around, the wheel wells aren't moving with it. So let's fix that. So just take your wheel well and click on that, and then click and drag and hold that over your wheels. Hold Shift and then drop to set parent. Bloop. And now it's inside of the wheel well there. And then we'll take the wheels and Shift drag that onto the car. And now everything is inside the car. That way, if we click and drag the car, everything stays together. Or if we take the wheels and, hit G and Y, we can readjust these on the fly and kind of, update where we really want these wheels to land. And it's going to take our wheel wells with it. So that's a good stopping point for this lesson. Let's go ahead and jump into the next lesson where we're going to do some shading and do the interior of the car.